Something today that I thought would be a good idea to share it with you. How can you tell that the Americans have already taken over your country? What's the um, uh, what's the point that they have to cross? What's the line of demarcation where you can tell that the Americans have succeeded to take over your country? And I was thinking in the case of Romania, where I have my experience in the past 30 years. You can tell that that's the moment when the forces that they sponsored throughout the years begin censoring speech and begin advocating for repression, for political repression against the disruptors in society, against the dissidents. So there is actually a life cycle. I think it makes a bit of sense to talk about this. So you can imagine there's a country, a sovereign country, which starts off with statist forces in power and with the public discourse generally framed by statist media, sovereigntist media. Most of the journalists basically convey the point of view of the government and how how a Western oriented regime takes over is slowly by creeping in with agents that disseminate rebellion, basically. So the first stage is that there are journalists, there are opinion makers of many kinds, civil society, what they call civil society generally, NGOs, that advocate for rebellion. They advocate for protests, they advocate for insubordination, they challenge the governmental point of view all the time. This was very obvious in Romania in the past 30 years. So there's been constant dissent towards the main party that's been in power. And you can tell that the party, in this case, the Social Democratic Party, basically the successor of the Revolutionary Party that took down Ceausescu in 1989. So you can tell that there is a cutoff point. There comes a time when these so-called Western influencers stop becoming dissidents towards the government, stop becoming critics against the government, even though the same government is in power nominally. You know, the same party is the majority party in the Romanian legislature, and it is also giving the prime minister. So it is the party in power, the same one that they were organizing protests against. But from a certain moment onwards, that party, because it started to toe the American line completely without any dissent, from that point onwards, the so-called civil society, all these NGOs that slowly took over the public discourse, they stopped seeing this party as a threat. They stopped criticizing this party. They stopped criticizing the government. What they started to do was to criticize dissent, so to criticize the dissenters. I think the cutoff point for this in Romania was the pandemic. So in 2020, from this point onwards, the enemy of the civil society in Romania, the enemy of these people that the Americans introduced, infiltrated as agents in the 1990s, as journalists, NGO people, and so on, their enemy from 2020 onwards became the dissenting public. So and this has carried on ever since. So it wasn't so much because okay, it was a public health emergency or whatever, you know, we all had to stick together. No, it started in 2020. It started during the pandemic. Everybody who was against the measures and who was challenging the public discourse regarding the measures was deemed uh, everything from a Putin propagandist to a foreign agent to a criminal to whatever, everything, moron, everything. And this has carried on until today, and I assume that this is the new normal. So these people, fact checkers, academics, but who always present the Western point of view, the American narrative, so-called journalists, all of these people uh, have since uh, joined in with the government essentially, because the government has the political class in Romania has pretty much been wiped clean of any sovereigntist influences, and all the people who had any kind of opposition to the corporate agenda and to the American agenda went to jail or were had their reputations tarnished to a degree that they were no longer eligible for office. They basically had to quit politics. So yeah, the main Romanian political party, has been wiped clean of these people, and as a consequence, the Americans no longer have a problem with it because it has no teeth anymore. There's no more patriotic position in it. Therefore, all of their agents now bark against the dissenters in society. So ever since 2020, whereas these people were very, very adamant against the political class, against the corruption of the political class, and so on, ever since 2020, ever since the pandemic, this constellation of agents has turned against the population, has turned against the public, and it is now basically a reactionary force. It is a force that works for the government or works for the power that upholds the government, and is barking at the dissenters against the sanitary measures, which are very draconian. Therefore, at the subsequently against the dissenters regarding the war narrative and regarding the war preparations. So basically, now in Romania, the war against Ukraine, the war in Ukraine is a similarly hot topic, just like the pandemic was, and any kind of speech against Romania's involvement, even against Romania's military involvement, is deemed Putinist speech, foreign agent speech, this kinds of things, just like it was during the pandemic, and it is done so by the same people. Funny enough, because I had a brief moment of fame in 2019 when I challenged the sitting president, who was looking to become re-elected. He was seeking a second term, and in the fashion that has become commonplace nowadays, he refused to take any kind of debate with either with his opponent or with any kind of serious journalists, and he organized this mock debate with his cronies, essentially, with his lapdogs. Because I had a brief moment of fame there, I was asked by all of these American outlets, American subsidized outlets, this type of civil society that I was talking about. I was asked for interviews, and I refused then. And funny enough, I was approached by one of these outlets recently, and they wanted to uh, to interview me 5 years after the that moment of fame. And well, I did not decline, but let's say that they probably got the picture, seeing what I'm posting and what I'm speaking here, in case they follow me. But anyway, so yeah, it's interesting how these people that were sent out as agents of dissent have turned into the most reactionary forces against any kind of protest, any kind of political opposition to the mainstream narrative. Why? Because the narrative has been taken over, because political power has been taken over by the agents of the Americans. So from this point onwards, what was the main virtue in the 1990s and in the 2000s, the main tenet of a democratic society was dissent, opposition, protests, all of these things. Now the main tenet of a civilized society, of civilized Western society, is obedience. It is all about not rocking the boat, following the official narrative, following only official sources, drawing your information only from the approved outlets, and so on and so forth. And yeah, actually, I was actually thinking about this during my high school years. I had the opportunity to interview a couple of journalists from the new regime. So after 1990, this is when they started to become journalists. And one of them told me something very interesting. He told me that there was this lack of credible journalists after the revolution, in the sense that you had the people who were formed into this journalistic profession before 1990, and they were no longer deemed suitable to be the ones passing on the message of the new order. So new journalists were sought after, and how it happened was that just people from various other professions. This guy was, I think, studying in the Polytechnic or something like this. He became one of the main news anchors after 1990, and how that happened was he just showed up for this interview, and they just asked him to translate a piece of news from a Western news agency, from an American news agency, just to translate it from English into Romanian, and he could do that, and they told him that's all you need to know, because from that point onwards, the journalistic profession ceased to be something analytical, something like, okay, let's seek out various sources, see where the truth lies. If you look at articles, newspaper articles from the 1990s from Romania, there are still these remnants of the old press where they quote various news agencies, Tanyug, the Yugoslav news agency, Bria Novosti, the Russian one, and so on and so forth. But now, now they only quote Reuters, Associated Press, of course. So they only quote Bloomberg. They only quote the American ones. Back in the day, journalism meant to be able to triangulate opinions, to take information from various sources, and to put it together to convey a mixed point of view, basically how the Russians see it, how the Yugoslavs see it, how the Iranians see it, and so on and so forth. Now, if you do that, you're a Russian propagandist or an Iranian propagandist or whatever. So these people who have taken over public discourse in Romania and who are stooges of the Americans, they basically paint any kind of objective drive towards informing yourself as misinformation. Why? Because you're going outside of the American bubble, and you're choosing information sources which are not in the NATO information space. Therefore, that's misinformation. Why? Because it favors the enemy. It doesn't matter if it's true or not. It's not about the semantic validity, the logical validity. No, 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 no. It's about the political correctness, in the sense that if Iran gives out an information or gives out a narrative, it doesn't matter if that's correct or not. What matters is that it is given by Iran, and Iran is the enemy. If it is given by Israel, it has no relevance whether or not it is correct or not. But Israel is on the same side with us. Therefore, the Israeli piece of information is news, and the Iranian piece of information is just Iranian disinformation, Iranian propaganda. This is how it works. And these people who were infiltrated in the Romanian society in the 1990s, and not only in Romania, all over Eastern Europe, and they achieved a power, a position of power at some point. All of these people, the high priests of the American discourse, are the ones who are framing the mainstream discourse now, whereas they were the dissidents in the 1990s, and dissent was the number one virtue that you could have. Now, conformity is the number one virtue, and obedience, because they are the ones in power. So this is my observation. This is what I wanted to share with you guys. And as always, if you like what I do, you can feel free to share it to somebody who might appreciate it. So this is it for now. See you next time. Bye.